Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. Most people would say Charlotte and I had the perfect life. The kind of life that made neighbors wave a little longer, made friends comment on how lucky we were. A beautiful home just outside Chicago, a golden retriever named Buddy who greeted us at the door, and 7 years of marriage that, from the outside, looked effortless. While you're here, leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from, I'd love to know. But perfection is a funny thing. It makes people stop looking too closely. And lately, I have been looking closer than ever. Charlotte and I met in college. She was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying, charming, adventurous, always moving toward the next big thing. I was different. Thoughtful, steady, the kind of guy who liked knowing where he stood. Somehow, we worked. At least, we used to. The shift had been slow at first. Little things. Client meetings that stretched late into the night. A phone she always seemed to keep face down. The way she would come home, drop her purse by the door, and barely look at me. At first, I told myself it was work stress. Charlotte was a freelance interior designer, always juggling new clients, bouncing between projects. It made sense. Until it didn't. The night it really clicked, I was sitting in the living room, laptop open, Buddy curled up at my feet. Charlotte had texted an hour ago, late meeting. Don't wait up. I glanced at the time. 10:42 p.m. Too late for a design consultation. Too late for anything that made sense. I closed my laptop, stood, and paced toward the window. The street was quiet, porch lights glowing, the occasional car rolling past. Then I saw it. A sleek black sedan, pulling up 2 houses down. Charlotte stepped out. Not from the driver's seat. From the passenger side. My jaw clenched as I watched her lean down, say something through the open door. The car didn't pull away immediately. Whoever was inside wasn't in a rush to leave her. Finally, she shut the door and turned toward our house. She wasn't in a hurry. She wasn't flustered. She was comfortable. Like this wasn't the first time. I stepped back into the shadows of the living room as she entered, the door clicking shut behind her. She let out a sigh, dropping her keys onto the counter. You're still up. I stayed where I was. Where else would I be? She let out a short laugh, kicking off her heels. Work was brutal. This client keeps changing her mind last minute. I swear, if I have to, who dropped you off? The words cut through the air. She froze for half a second. A blink. A shift of her weight. Then, just like that, the mask slipped back into place. Oh, that was Vanessa. You know, from the design firm. She offered to give me a ride since my car was in the shop. A bold lie. I leaned against the arm of the couch, arms crossed. Your car's in the driveway. She hesitated. I meant, it was earlier. I got it back this afternoon. I didn't blink. You didn't mention that. She waved a hand, moving toward the kitchen. Ethan, I didn't think it was a big deal. I watched her carefully. She wasn't rattled. Because she had done this before. I'll bet, I said quietly. She opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, anything to look casual. In control. I didn't move. I just let the silence stretch. Finally, she sighed, turning toward me with an easy smile. You're acting weird. Is something wrong? The audacity of that question nearly made me laugh. But I just shook my head. Nothing at all. She studied me for a moment longer, then nodded, taking a sip of water. Okay. Well, I'm exhausted. I'm gonna shower and head to bed. She disappeared down the hallway, her steps light, completely unbothered. I stood there for a long time. Then, slowly, I walked to the window, looking down the street. The sedan was gone. But I had seen enough. Charlotte thought she was playing a game. What she didn't realize. I had just decided to start playing, too. Charlotte had always been quick with her phone, but now. Now it was practically an extension of her hand. She was never careless. Never left it lying around like she used to. It was always in her pocket, in her purse, or face down on the counter. But lately, it had been lighting up a lot. New messages. Names I didn't recognize. Alex. Rob. Not Vanessa. Not her usual work contacts. Men. I didn't mention it the first time I saw one pop up while she was in the shower. Or the second. Or even the third. But by the fourth, I wasn't just noticing. I was watching. Hey, who's Alex? The question was casual, thrown out over coffee one morning as she scrolled through her phone. She barely looked up. Huh? Alex, I repeated. Your phone's been buzzing a lot. New client? She hesitated. Barely a second. But it was there. Then she laughed lightly, setting her cup down. Oh, yeah. He's just a referral. Potential kitchen remodel. Super picky guy, so he asks a million questions. I leaned against the counter, studying her. And Rob? She blinked, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something behind her eyes. Annoyance. Why are you asking? I shrugged. You used to talk about your clients all the time. Now it's like they don't exist unless I bring them up. She sighed, shaking her head. Babe, come on. You know how it is. I meet a ton of people every day. Some stick, some don't. That was true. But it wasn't the answer to my question. Still, I let it go, for now. Even Buddy could tell something was wrong. Charlotte used to scoop him up in the mornings, scratch behind his ears, talk to him like he was her kid. Lately, she barely patted his head before grabbing her bag and bolting out the door. The dog noticed. He would linger by the door longer than usual after she left, whining softly before lying down, ears flat. He was waiting for something that wasn't coming back. And I was beginning to wonder if I was doing the same. Later that week, I met up with my best friend, Ryan, at a bar downtown. It was something we did once a month, a habit from our college days. Normally, the conversations were easy, sports, work, old stories. But tonight, I was quiet. Ryan noticed. He leaned forward, setting his beer down. All right, man. What's up? I shook my head. Nothing. He gave me a look. Try again. I exhaled through my nose. It's Charlotte. His expression tightened. What about her? I hesitated. Saying it out loud made it too real. But I needed to hear it from someone else. Someone outside of my own head. She's been acting different, I admitted. Coming home late. Checking out. And there are these messages, from guys I've never heard of. Ryan's jaw tensed. Have you asked her? She brushes it off. Do you believe her? I didn't answer right away. Ryan sat back. Ethan, listen to me. If something feels off, it probably is. I met his gaze. I had been telling myself I was paranoid. That maybe Charlotte was just in a phase. That this was something fixable. But Ryan wasn't one to sugarcoat things. And neither was I. I nodded slowly. Yeah. I know. He took a sip of his beer. Then stop waiting for answers to come to you. Start looking for them. I stared down at the condensation on my glass, running my finger along the rim. Ryan was right. Charlotte thought she was keeping me in the dark. But what she didn't realize. I was already turning on the lights. I had always been the kind of man who believed in logic over impulse. But as I drove across town that afternoon, my instincts had already made up their mind. Charlotte had told me she'd be at a high-end property in the Lake District, a new client looking for a full interior redesign. She made a big deal about how exclusive the job was, how it could be her breakthrough into luxury homes. I had nodded, told her that sounded amazing. Now, I was on my way to see for myself. The property was massive, set back from the road with a long, winding driveway. The kind of place built for people who never had to check their bank accounts. I parked just down the street, out of sight, and made my way up the drive on foot. The sun glinted off sleek black window panes, casting sharp reflections across the perfectly manicured lawn. A few cars were parked outside, one of them a matte gray sports car. That one stood out. I reached the side of the house, staying close to the tree line. A sliding glass door was cracked open, leading onto a sprawling patio. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Low voices, teasing, comfortable. I stepped closer. Through the opening, I caught a glimpse of Charlotte, and she wasn't alone. She was sitting on the edge of a sleek marble bar, legs wrapped around a man standing between them. Not just any man. AJ. The homeowner. A well-known investor, the kind of guy whose name showed up in business magazines. He was dressed too casually for a meeting, shirt unbuttoned just enough to make it clear this wasn't about design. Then another figure moved into view. Rob. The same Rob whose name had been lighting up her phone for weeks. He leaned in, whispering something against her neck. Charlotte laughed. Not forced. Not nervous. Comfortable. Familiar. Like she belonged there. I stood completely still, my pulse steady. My mind had already processed the truth. Charlotte wasn't just lying. She wasn't just cheating. She had integrated herself into these men's lives in a way I had never even considered. This wasn't some affair born from loneliness or boredom. This was calculated. For how long? Weeks? Months? Longer? I didn't know. But I was going to find out. I took one last look, committing the scene to memory. Then, as silently as I had arrived, I turned and walked away. No confrontation. No explosion of rage. That wasn't how I handled things. Charlotte thought she had control of this situation. She thought she had options. She was about to learn she had none. Charlotte walked into the house like she had every other evening, without a care in the world. She tossed her purse onto the counter, let out a dramatic sigh, and kicked off her heels. Long day, she muttered, heading straight for the fridge. I swear, these clients are going to drive me insane. I sat at the dining table, rolling a bite of steak over my tongue, watching her. The same routine. The same little complaints about work. Like she hadn't spent the afternoon tangled up in someone else's arms. She grabbed a bottle of wine, poured herself a glass, and leaned against the counter. Oh, before I forget, there's a dinner event this weekend. One of my clients is hosting. Should be good for networking. She took a sip, glanced at me over the rim of her glass, and waited. She always did this. Casually bringing things up, testing my reaction. I set my fork down and met her gaze. Which client? Her lips parted slightly, just for a moment. AJ. The real estate investor I mentioned. I nodded. The one with the lake house. A flicker of something flashed across her face, but she recovered too quickly for the average person to notice. I wasn't the average person. Yeah, she said smoothly. That one. I leaned back, pretending to consider. What's the occasion? She waved a hand. Just business. Big networking opportunity. I studied her carefully. You want me to come? Her fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her glass. "Of course," she said, too quickly. A lesser man might have missed it. She didn't want me there. This wasn't a dinner. This was something else. I tilted my head. "You sound thrilled about it." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "You know I'd love for you to be there, but these things get boring fast. Just a bunch of real estate guys talking numbers. It's probably not your scene." That told me everything I needed to know. She wanted an excuse for me to say no. She took another sip of wine, trying to appear relaxed. Like she wasn't already building her next lie. I let the silence stretch just long enough for her to feel it. Then I smiled, picked up my fork, and went back to my steak. "Sounds interesting," I said. "I'll think about it." I didn't need to look up to know she was watching me. Trying to figure me out. She had no idea I had already made up my mind. That night, while she was in the shower, I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my messages. I didn't believe in fate, but maybe there was a reason Nicole had reached out a few weeks ago. We had known each other in high school, lost touch over the years, then reconnected online. It had been nothing serious. A few messages, a couple of jokes about old memories. But now it was exactly what I needed. I pulled up our last conversation. "Nicole, if you're ever free, we should grab coffee. Catch up like old times." I let my fingers hover over the keyboard for a second before typing my response. Coffee sounds good. How about tomorrow?" The reply came almost immediately. "Nicole, would love that. Let's do it." I smirked, locking my phone. Charlotte had spent months playing me, thinking she was always one step ahead. It was time she learned I wasn't the man she thought I was. The next morning, Charlotte rushed through breakfast, barely saying more than a few words before heading out. Buddy sat at the door, watching her leave, tail still. He knew something was off. As soon as the door shut behind her, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door myself. Nicole was waiting. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was making my next move. Charlotte barely looked at me as she rushed around the house, throwing things into her purse. The sun had set an hour ago, casting long shadows through the windows, but she was just now leaving for work. She adjusted her coat, grabbed her keys, and tossed out the excuse as if it were routine. "I have to pick up some design samples. Last-minute thing." I didn't react. Didn't question it. That's what she expected, for me to just accept it. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, arms folded. "Late night for samples." She hesitated, just for a second. "Yeah, well, clients don't always plan ahead." She was already moving toward the door, eager to be anywhere but here. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder. Then she was gone. I listened to the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway. Waited another moment. Then I picked up my phone and called Nicole. She answered after the first ring. "Ethan." Her voice was warm, smooth. I could hear the underlying curiosity. "Hope I'm not calling too late," I said. "Not at all." I kept my voice even. "Still up for dinner?" A small pause. Then, "Absolutely." I grabbed my jacket. Charlotte had her plans. Tonight, I had mine. The bistro was quiet when I arrived, the kind of place tucked between old brick buildings, glowing with soft amber light. Nicole was already there, waiting at a corner table, a glass of wine in front of her. When she saw me, she smiled. Not polite. Not forced. Genuine. I slid into the seat across from her. "Appreciate you meeting me on short notice." She tilted her head. "Something tells me you needed it." The waitress arrived, taking my order, and for a moment, we just sat there, studying each other. Nicole had always been easy to talk to. Back in high school, she had been the sharp one, the one who never let people walk over her. We had reconnected casually, but now, sitting across from her, I could feel the shift. She wasn't just a familiar face anymore. "So," she said, swirling her wine. "How bad is it?" I let out a slow breath, considering my words. "Let's just say," I said, picking up my water, "I've been married to someone I don't recognize." She leaned forward slightly. "What happened?" I looked at her, debating how much to say. Then I decided, all of it. The late nights. The disappearing acts. The lies told so easily, like they were second nature. The names flashing across her phone. The house by the lake. Nicole listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she exhaled. "Wow." I smirked. "Yeah." She set her glass down. "And you haven't confronted her yet?" "Not yet." Nicole's lips curved slightly. "Smart." I raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "Why let her control the conversation? Let her think she's ahead. Makes it that much better when she realizes she's not." I chuckled. "You always did understand strategy." She grinned. I was a fast learner. The waitress arrived with our food, and just like that, the conversation shifted, effortlessly. We talked about old memories, about how life had twisted and turned in ways neither of us expected. And for the first time in months, I felt something real. No forced small talk. No tiptoeing around what was broken. Just clarity. After dinner, Nicole didn't hesitate. "My place?" she asked, standing beside her car. I looked at her, this woman who had always been straightforward. No games. No deception. And I nodded. Charlotte could have her late-night meetings. Tonight, I had my own. Charlotte pulled into the driveway just before midnight, letting the car idle for a moment. The house was dark, still. The porch light flickered, casting a dim glow over the front steps. She should have felt relieved. This was her routine, slipping in late after her so-called client meetings, greeted by the quiet comfort of a husband who never questioned her schedule. Instead, something felt off. Her fingers drummed lightly against the steering wheel as she glanced at the house. The windows were pitch black. No faint glow of the TV from the living room. No sound of Buddy's paws patting across the floor, his usual response to hearing her pull up. She exhaled, grabbing her purse and stepping out of the car. The air was cool, the street eerily silent. A few porch lights flickered down the block, but not a single car passed by. She locked the car and walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the pavement. Pushing the key into the lock, she turned it slowly, almost cautiously. Why did this feel wrong? The door opened with a soft creak, and she stepped inside, flicking on the hallway light. Silence. A deep, unnatural silence. Her eyes swept the space. The house looked normal, at first glance. The couch was in its usual place. The kitchen counter was clear except for the usual coffee mug Ethan left by the sink. But something was missing. Charlotte's heartbeat picked up as she stepped forward, her gaze darting toward the living room. No laptop on the table. No jacket draped over the chair. Her stomach twisted slightly as she turned toward Buddy's crate. The golden retriever was curled up inside, his head resting on his paws. Ethan never crated him at night. Her pulse quickened. She crouched near the crate, running a hand along the bars. "Hey, boy," she murmured. Buddy barely lifted his head. His tail didn't wag. She swallowed, standing abruptly. Something was wrong. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and dialed Ethan's number. The call rang twice before he answered. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Yeah." She clutched the phone tighter. "Where are you?" A pause. long enough for her chest to tighten. Then, out. Her breath hitched slightly. Ethan never stayed out late. If anything, he was predictable. He worked, he came home, he relaxed. This wasn't him. She forced a casual tone. Out where? Another pause. I'll be back whenever. Charlotte's lips parted slightly. Ethan, the line went dead. She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the screen. Call ended. The air in the house felt colder now. She stood there, frozen, as reality started to settle in. Ethan was gone. Not just physically. Something had changed. The docile, dependable husband she had kept waiting in the background, wasn't waiting anymore. Her grip on the phone tightened. For the first time, she felt the shift, and she had no idea how to stop it. Charlotte barely slept. She had stayed up, pacing the bedroom, checking her phone every few minutes, expecting Ethan to walk through the door. But he never did. By the time the sun crept through the blinds, she was still wearing the same clothes from the night before, her pulse unsteady. Then she heard it, the front door unlocking. She shot up, moving toward the hallway just as Ethan stepped inside. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't storming in, demanding answers. No. He was calm. And that was somehow worse. He walked past her without a word, heading straight for Buddy's leash by the door. He clipped it onto the dog's collar, gave him a small pat, and then, without looking at her, turned toward the bedroom. She followed, tension thick in the air. Where were you last night? Ethan didn't answer. He pulled an empty suitcase from the closet, set it on the bed, and began packing. Charlotte's throat tightened. What are you doing? Still, no response. She stepped closer. Ethan, then he finally spoke, his voice steady. I saw you. The words hit before she could prepare for them. Her breath caught. What? Ethan turned, his expression unreadable. At the house. With AJ and Rob. The world tilted. He knew. Charlotte's mind scrambled, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. She forced a laugh, waving a hand. That's ridiculous. What are you even talking about? Ethan didn't blink. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The suitcase lay open on the bed, half-packed. Buddy sat by the door, ears low, watching. Charlotte felt her skin prickle. I don't know what you think you saw, but, Ethan cut her off. You were wrapped around them like it was your job. She stared at him, mind spinning. This wasn't going how she planned. Ethan, it wasn't, spare me the excuses. His tone was sharp now, cold in a way she had never heard before. She swallowed hard. It just happened. A slow, humorless chuckle left Ethan's lips. Oh, it just happened. He grabbed another shirt, folded it neatly, and placed it in the suitcase. That's how you're gonna spin this? Her chest tightened. It didn't mean anything. He snapped the suitcase shut. It meant enough for you to lie about it. Charlotte felt the panic clawing at her throat. She had always controlled the narrative, always dictated how the conversation would go. But now, Ethan wasn't listening. She took a deep breath, switching tactics. This is your fault. Ethan froze. She pushed forward. You never paid attention. You were always working, always in your own world. I needed something more. Silence. Ethan slowly turned toward her, his eyes darker than she had ever seen. My fault. Her mouth felt dry. He stepped forward, closing the space between them. Let's get something straight, he said, voice low. You didn't cheat because I was distant. You didn't cheat because I didn't see you. She swallowed. You cheated because you thought you'd get away with it. Charlotte felt the power shift. For the first time, she wasn't the one controlling the situation. Ethan grabbed his suitcase, whistled for Buddy, and walked toward the door. She stared after him, frozen in place. And just before he stepped out, he turned back one last time. "You wanted excitement?" His voice was sharp. "Let's see how exciting life is when I'm not in it." Then he walked out, leaving her standing there, alone. Charlotte had always believed she was the one in control. For months, she had dictated the rules, woven the lies, and assumed Ethan would follow her lead like he always had. But now he was standing at the foot of the porch steps, suitcase in hand, looking at her like she was nothing more than a stranger. And for the first time, she was the one panicking. "You're leaving?" Just like that? Ethan didn't look shaken. Didn't hesitate. He simply raised an eyebrow. "Would you prefer I stay and pretend like nothing happened?" Charlotte stepped forward, barefoot on the cold wood, her pulse racing. "Ethan, this is insane. We need to talk about this. We've talked enough." His voice was calm. Too calm. She let out a shaky breath. "You're just running away." Ethan let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You really don't get it, do you?" She folded her arms tightly across her chest. "No, I don't. Because we're married, and you don't just walk out on your wife like this." His gaze darkened. "You don't just cheat on your husband, either. But here we are." Charlotte's stomach twisted, but she fought to keep her composure. "This doesn't have to end like this," she tried again, voice softer now. "We can fix this." Ethan gave her a long look, then turned away, heading toward his car. She clenched her fists. "You're running to her, aren't you?" That stopped him. Slowly, he turned back. "Her. Nicole." She spat the name like it burned her tongue. "You think I don't know?" Ethan exhaled sharply, shaking his head with a smirk. "Unbelievable. Oh, don't play innocent." Her voice rose, the panic seeping through. "You've been sneaking out just like I have. Don't pretend you're some victim." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The difference is, I didn't lie about what I wanted." Charlotte's mouth snapped shut. "You spent months deceiving me," he continued. "Making me think I was crazy for noticing the late nights, the disappearing acts. And now, the second you think I might be doing the same thing, you can't handle it." Her breathing was uneven. He tilted his head. "Tell me, Charlotte, does it feel good?" She swallowed hard. "Ethan," he didn't let her finish. "Does it feel good to wonder where I've been? Who I've been with?" She stared at him, completely unprepared for this version of her husband. The man she had manipulated, lied to, and pushed aside had been replaced by someone else, someone who wasn't waiting for her anymore. Her voice came out small. "I thought we were happy." Ethan gave a bitter chuckle. "We were. Until you decided we weren't enough." She opened her mouth, closed it again. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. His jaw tightened. "Then what was it like, Charlotte?" She flinched at the sharpness in his tone. "You needed excitement." Ethan scoffed. "You needed more." Charlotte felt her hands tremble. "Then tell me," he said coolly. "Did you ever stop to think about what I needed?" Silence. Ethan shook his head, stepping back. "No. You didn't. Because for you, it was never about us. It was about winning." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "I don't want to lose you." He exhaled through his nose. "Charlotte, you lost me a long time ago." She let out a shaky breath. "Then don't go." He tilted his head. "Why?" "So you can decide when I'm allowed to leave." She stepped forward, reaching for his hand. "We can work through this." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled his hand away. No, Charlotte. His voice was calm. Final. We can't. He turned, opening the car door. She felt something inside her break. Ethan, please. He looked back at her one last time. You wanted excitement. His voice was sharper now, laced with something colder. Let's see how exciting life is when I'm not in it. And with that, he got into the car and drove away, leaving Charlotte standing alone in the empty driveway. The house was eerily silent when Ethan returned. The air inside felt different now, lighter, cleaner. Like the walls had been waiting for this moment as much as he had. Charlotte was sitting on the couch, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was streaked with dried tears, but there was still defiance in her eyes. She had spent the entire night here, probably convincing herself she still had control over the situation. Ethan wasn't here to argue. He was here to end it. He walked in, set his keys on the counter, and without missing a beat, grabbed an empty suitcase from the hallway closet. Then, without hesitation, he tossed it onto the couch beside her. Charlotte flinched slightly. What, pack your things, Ethan said flatly. She let out a breathless laugh, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're serious? Ethan didn't blink. Dead serious. She shot up from the couch, her voice rising. You don't get to just kick me out of my own house. Ethan tilted his head slightly, studying her. She still didn't get it. This house isn't yours, he said calmly. Her jaw clenched. It's half mine. We're married. That means, Ethan reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. He didn't throw it at her. Didn't slam it down. Instead, he placed it on the coffee table, as if this were nothing more than a business transaction. Charlotte hesitated before snatching it up, flipping through the pages. Her eyes darted back and forth, scanning the words, then her face drained of color. This is, the deed, Ethan confirmed. Bought with my inheritance. Before we were married. Her breathing quickened. That doesn't mean, it means, Ethan cut in, voice steady, that this house is mine. Charlotte's fingers tightened around the pages. I've lived here for years. Ethan shrugged. And now you don't. Her hands shook as she dropped the papers back onto the table. You can't just throw me out like this. Ethan exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Charlotte, 4 months, you've been sneaking around. Lying. Making me feel like a fool in my own home. He gestured around the living room. You wanted freedom so badly. Here it is. She swallowed hard, looking at him like she didn't recognize him anymore. Maybe she never really had. Her voice broke slightly. Where am I supposed to go? Ethan shrugged again. That's not my problem. Tears welled in her eyes, but he didn't feel a thing. Not anymore. She shook her head, voice trembling. Ethan, don't do this. He didn't answer. Didn't flinch. Just waited. Charlotte wiped at her face, inhaled sharply, then grabbed the suitcase. She moved stiffly, shoving clothes into it, moving between the bedroom and the hallway, her breath ragged with frustration. When she finally reached the front door, she turned, suitcase in hand. Ethan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, Buddy sitting beside him. Charlotte opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, a final plea, maybe. But Ethan didn't give her the chance. He shut the door. No hesitation. No looking back. Outside, Charlotte was just another stranger on the driveway. And inside? Ethan stood in his house, with his dog, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Thank you for listening to the end, I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.